How are you? I'm Renee Tesaro, class of 82 and chair of this year's virtual CLW conference. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us tonight for tonight's presentation, Make a Habit of Supporting Women, How One Woman Got a Seat at the Table. We appreciate you taking time out of your busy professional and personal lives to connect with Lafayette tonight. I'd like to recognize some of the loyal leopards we've got in our audience here. We have Ellen Weiler, who is the chair of the Council of Lafayette Women. If you could raise your hand or wave, Ellen, that would be great. Tracy Sutka, president of the Alumni Council. Lisa Castle, former chair of the Alumni Council. And Bob Weiner. We've got a beloved member, recently retired member of Lafayette's faculty with us here tonight. Before I introduce our speaker, I'd like to go over some housekeeping items, a few housekeeping items. First, please know that we have utilized the audience mute feature in order to ensure that the presentation is not interrupted by any background noise. We invite you to include your full name and class year on your profile by renaming yourself. You could click on those three little dots on the upper right of your video profile and put in your class year if you'd like to do that. That's always helpful. For the best viewing experience, please select speaker view in the top right corner of your screen. This will allow the current speaker to be front and center on your screen. We welcome questions and ask that you use the chat feature located at the bottom of your screen to type in any questions that you may have. Please know that this presentation will be recorded so that you and the rest of the Lafayette community will have access to it later. And now I'd like to introduce our speaker, Melissa Shusterman. Melissa graduated from Lafayette in 1989 with a degree in Russian studies and a minor in Chinese literature. Following graduation, she worked for large networks such as FX and the Food Network before returning to Pennsylvania to raise her son and start her own successful digital video company. Since then, Melissa has successfully grown her business, working with organizations across Pennsylvania and the country while residing in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania, with her husband Hans and son Paris. I also want to give a shout out to Melissa's parents, Richard, Lafayette class of 61, and his wife, Joan. Clearly, as you'll see tonight, Melissa is not someone who sits on the sidelines and hopes for change. Melissa is someone who paves the way for change. In 2017, she decided to run for the office of state representative for Pennsylvania's 157th district, which encompasses Chester and Montgomery counties. Over the course of the campaign, she knocked on tens of thousands of doors. She raised hundreds of thousands of dollars, and she gained widespread recognition. In fact, she was featured on the cover of New York Magazine. In November 2018, Melissa was elected to office, defeating a four-term incumbent challenger by over 4,000 votes. It happened to be a historic year for women in Pennsylvania, with women increasing their share of representation in both the Pennsylvania House and Senate, as she'll explain. From 2018 through 2020, Melissa served on the Judiciary, Aging and Older Adult Services, and Tourism and Recreational Development Committees. She has authored legislation on small business loans, gun control, environmental sustainability, and animal protection. She was selected as the secretary of the Judiciary Committee and co-chair of the Autism and Intellectual Disabilities Caucus. Melissa was also the first freshman legislator selected as deputy whip. Not surprisingly, Melissa ran for re-election last year and won by 37%. She has been appointed deputy whip for a second term, and she serves on the Judiciary, Aging and Older Adult Services, Commerce, and Child and Youth Committees. Melissa was appointed to PennServe, Pennsylvania's State Service Commission, by Governor Tom Wolf. She has also been appointed to the Greater Valley Forge Transportation Board. She is first chair of the Southeast Delegations and secretary of the Aging Committee. And she is the founder and chair of the Animal Protection Caucus. Tonight, I am very proud to welcome Melissa as she shares her journey from entrepreneur to the Pennsylvania State House. Melissa, take it away.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much, Renee, for that introduction. But as you can see, I'm still a little bit salty about not being a mermaid. I have a lot of other titles right now, though, which basically means a lot of work. And that's a good thing. And I feel privileged and honored to be a public servant here in Pennsylvania. So I want to thank Renee and thank the Women's Conference leaders for pulling this together. We tried last year, and then of course COVID hit. And congratulations to everyone here. We're a year into COVID, and I hope this is inspiring for you. And congratulations to Lafayette College on celebrating 51 years of women. First slide, please. I'm really honored to be with all of you today to share my personal story of running for office in Pennsylvania. I've titled it, Make a Habit of Supporting Women. Woo, I gotta get back to my speech. Let me, sorry about that. Oops, exit full screen. Everyone hang out. There we go, thank you. I titled this speech, Make a Habit of Supporting Women, a story of how one woman got a seat at the table. Because every single woman joining us for this talk tonight has a unique set of experiences and attitudes that inform how she moves throughout the world. Those unique experiences also have a way of merging us with others at different points of our lives. Lafayette, for example, is a common thread that runs through this group. But there are also some common threads connecting women that we would not look back upon with the same fondness. For example, I'm sure many of you can relate to people feeling the need to comment on your appearance or mention how you can or cannot do this job or that activity. Can I speak a little bit without a slide? Thank you. I encountered plenty of this feedback when running for state representative in 2018. Much of this came from individuals who actually believed these comments to be well-intentioned and that they were acting in my best interest. I was told to wait my turn. I was told to wear more makeup. And from my own local party, I received these words of encouragement. Don't bother, you'll never win. He's impossible to beat. We all have our own version of these stories. Yours may have happened in a lab or in a classroom, maybe even in your own home. I think most of us would imagine that when these comments occur, it will be someone who opposes us, though in fact, many of us have encountered these words from the closest to us. And in some ways, these stories, these comments, no matter how demoralizing or hurtful, become our motivators. We set out to prove others wrong. Women, especially women candidates in politics, are underestimated, under-recruited, and under-supported. We contend with double standards about our appearances, our appearance, our experiences, and even our own families. That may be why there are so few women in office here in my home state of Pennsylvania. Now let's go back in time for a moment, all the way back to 2016. Everyone, I mean, it was a lifetime ago. Next slide, please. So after the 2016 election, like many others, I was not only disappointed, but also a bit horrified. I was looking forward to having a woman finally break that last glass ceiling and become president of the United States. Hillary's loss hit me hard. It felt personal in ways that other elections had not. For what seemed like my whole life, I worked to support women's organizations and women's business groups. I consciously and purposely challenged barriers in my chosen field, which was television, film, and the digital world. As a director and producer, I sought out opportunities to mentor young women over my 20+ year career. I advocated for women to fight for equal pay for their work. I even spoke at a previous Lafayette College conference about making sure women were paid their worth. And in my eyes, a woman losing the presidency meant many industries could continue to openly harass and intimidate women, overlook them for positions of power, and continue paying them less than men. So I was hurt. In my eyes, the loss meant that we, as women, had a lot of work to do. And we, as women, needed to get a seat at the table. For me, that feeling inspired me to get involved in politics for the first time. This is a very specific moment right here on the screen that prompted me to make the decision to run for office. It was when my son, Paris, who was 16 years old at the time, turned to me and said, "Mom, America doesn't want a smart, qualified woman in office." His quote ended up on the cover of New York Magazine and inspired me to begin running 2 days later. Next slide, please. So, from where I was standing, I had to admit he was right. Let's look at what Pennsylvania's representation looked like in 2016. I'm not going to read it all, but wow, talk about a glass ceiling. Anyone else feeling a little queasy right now with those numbers? Doesn't look good. 0 women in Congress, 0 women in Senate ever. No woman has ever served as governor of PA. I mean, it goes on. Next slide, please. So I learned that my home state ranks 32nd out of 50 when it came to female representation in government. For a historical perspective, this was 110 years after the 19th Amendment was ratified in Pennsylvania, 110 years of women voting in Pennsylvania, yet the state legislature was made up of only 18% women. That's 52% of the population holding less than 20% of the elected positions. Can we all do that together? So, next slide, please. So by Friday of this same week, I declared my campaign, and it was a full 2 years out from the midterm elections. I decided to get started early. At the time, I had no idea I'd be one of the many women on the cover of Time magazine, a group that would be later coined as The Wave. I had no idea that women from my industry would stand up and speak out against rape culture, sexual harassment, and intimidation as part of the Me Too movement. Next slide, next photo, please. I had no idea that women and men alike would march across the country for the Women's March on January 21st, 2017. At the time, it was the largest single-day protest in US history. Next photo, please. A reckoning was boiling underneath the surface. It was an unbelievably poignant moment in time. I had no idea that at age 50, with no experience in politics, that I would become part of a sisterhood of women who ran and won office in the name of creating change. Next slide, please. So now here's the reality. My race started with me and my 16-year-old son and 2 of his friends. Not one of them had even a driver's license, much less any political experience. We spent after school nights and weekends mapping out a strategy, writing up my policy priorities, launching a website, social media pages, and raising money. We even convinced some more high school students to join us. Next slide. Soon 4 turned into 20, and all of a sudden my campaign turned into a full-time job. Knocking doors, listening and having healthy conversations, creating social media, calling people to make sure they registered to vote, submitting op-eds, press releases, event information. We had asks for money, for meet and greets, for talks. We were learning the ins and outs. Next slide, please. And basically, no one was listening to us at this point. We were an army of rookies going up against the political machine. but we had youth and enthusiasm on our side. And soon we must have started to get under the skin of the political establishment. Next slide. Okay, I love this picture. This is me and Heather Ward. She was the youngest school board candidate in my area. And I went out and knocked doors with her. So part of running for office is not always just talking about yourself, but also advocating for others. And she called me on the day of her election. It was pouring like it always does in Pennsylvania on election day. And she went inside to shake off, and people are saying, little girl, you should go home, little girl. You know, like this is a big boy job. And she called me and I said, do you have a raincoat? And she goes, yes. Do you have an umbrella? She said, yes. I go outside and talk to the voters. Don't talk to the people in there. They're trying to intimidate you. Talk to the voters outside, shake their hands, listen. She did, and she won, becoming the youngest ever school board member. So that's a little inspiring story there. So I'm going to speak a little bit without a slide right now, because I'm going to speak to you. Everyone brace themselves. You know what it's like to get the ask. I'm going to speak to you about fundraising. Like it or not, asking for money is a huge part of the political process. And honestly, I hated it. I had never asked people for money in my entire life. I was an entrepreneur and a single parent for many years. And I didn't have enough guts to even ask someone, you know, can I borrow a cup of rice from my next door neighbor? So it was scary, and running for office can really test your ego. It makes for plenty of awkward silences at the bus stop and outside of the grocery store. It can make you feel alone, and one can take it personally. As a television director, I had plenty of experience pitching projects, stories, ideas, but now I was pitching myself, and this can be completely unintuitive if you grew up learning that it's rude to talk about yourself and to always make room for others before making more for yourself. But if you want people to buy in, either as a candidate or a part of an active group, you need to be forthcoming and direct about what you're selling to them. And believe me, people move on quickly if you don't stand up for yourself. Getting people to listen is a massive obstacle, even for people with great ideas. And this brings me to an easy way you can show your support for women candidates. Just believe that they are enough. Lean in. If you can write a check, write a check. If you can volunteer your time, jump in and do that. Those signs of support mean the world to new candidates, and we need more women running. Men have been doing this for years, and it's a pretty effective way to get a hold of power. They're either writing checks to support a candidate, or they are running for office and collecting those checks. So this is exactly what a group called Protect and Elect decided to do. So they weren't running for office like me. I met them as I started running for office. They were new like me. Their average age, maybe 65, maybe 68, average age of this group, okay? These women were new to it, and they invited me in to speak. Many were retired, successful women who were upset by the political landscape and trying to focus their efforts into real change. They wanted to be involved, but didn't understand the ins and outs of the process. And they were tired of arguing with friends and family and feeling helpless. So I went to speak with them and explain how important money is to the process. The women all pulled out their checkbooks after my speech and wrote a check. To me, a stranger. They knew I would uphold their values on the environment and women's health and education equity. And with that one check, they were all in. They were part of sort of my kitchen cabinet. And when we say kitchen cabinet, those are the people that you listen to. It is powerful and scary to see people invest in you, literally invest their money and trust you to take the baton and run with their priorities and really fight for it. But with that trust you build the consensus that allows you to run for office or support women running for office. So right at that moment, my campaign manager, Tyler, collected the checks. And then I did something unthinkable, but this group empowered me. I asked for another check. I said, the difference between men and women is women don't have the same network as men. If you look at the board seats on boards across Pennsylvania, majority of those board seats are men. So when you start looking in the different places where people do write checks from, women have, I would say, less access. And well, let's talk about awkward. I did this face-to-face, not on Zoom, where I could be like, I need to get another cup of tea. And it was okay. I wasn't booed or thrown out by people. I didn't insult anyone. Less women wrote checks the second time, but nonetheless, many did. As women, we must ask. And here's the side note. I know you guys will get a kick out of this. Protect and Elect are now a powerful activist group focusing on flipping the legislature so that issues important to them will be addressed. They have a seat at the table. They've done incredible things. I recommend anyone interested sign up for the Protect and Elect news. They have a little kind of an update, email update monthly. It's a fabulous group and they have some wonderful events. Okay, we can resume with slide 12. So I raised money and eventually became the top raiser in all of 203 campaigns in Pennsylvania that year. Yep, me, someone with very few connections. So we continue to go out in the community and got people excited, and we learned a couple of things. Oh, next slide, please. Go to where people hang out and bring politics to them. One of my first fundraisers was in someone's backyard. It was like a band, a beer, and me asking for donations and giving that, talking with them. And people were just starved for engagement and conversation. And it was fabulous. I don't know if there were Democrats or Republicans or independents or people who never vote there. People were really excited to be involved. Secondly, the second lesson I learned was get ready to be embraced by strangers. I have one of my best volunteers. His name is Bert. He was a local Republican man. And let me remind you, I ran as a Democrat. So he was a very well-known local Republican man who was interested in the environment and my slogan, which was common sense before politics, and banning assault weapons. And he became an advocate of mine. Bert still calls my office regularly, and we still agree on much more than people would expect. And we continue to merge our communities together. I help get Bert involved with Moms Demand Action. So when I go to their meetings, I always see Bert. So he's a great guy. And the third lesson is go with your gut always. Women have great ideas and intuition. My first campaign slogan was common sense before politics. And though I was running as a Democrat, this message resonated among most people as well as independents. My team, my supporters, and now my staff were diverse both politically and with their ideas. Sorry, can't get that out tonight. And that diversity served me really well, because I had kind of a microcosm of Pennsylvania right in my office or when I was running for office. Next slide, please. So we plugged away doing what we thought was best, knocking doors. We ended up knocking 25,000. That's a lot of doors. And our partners started to come out of the woodwork, some that we expected and some we did not. Eventually, we got a call from DNC down in Washington, D.C. And I put them on speaker with my original Fab Four, and those were the 4 high school students. And on the speaker, I had no idea who I was talking to. I was so tired. Someone from Washington, D.C. said, "Who's your insider? Who do you know? Who's your consultant?" To be honest, I was in such a fog. It had taken me to this moment to realize what we were doing. We were inspiring others to affect change. And eventually, in a full circle moment, my campaign did get too big for a small town operation to handle. We needed a professional campaign manager, field director. We had to run commercials on TV during the football games for 5 weeks. I had consultants. They came up from DC. Crazy, right? Next slide, please. The best part of running, win or lose, was seeing so many people becoming empowered. I had a campaign headquarters with a large parking lot, and this place became a hub of activity. We hosted live policy events. Stay-at-home dads and moms came to volunteer, as well as high schoolers and recent graduates. I hosted the governor's campaign, as well as the governor of Delaware. And for many days leading up to the election, people were coming and going to knock, write postcards, meet and discuss. There were times I was driving to go speak to another group, and I would look over and see my parking lot was completely filled up. So people were really engaged. And we did something that I thought was key. When it became very close to the end of my first election, we had a little money, and instead of asking for just volunteers, I put an ad out that we would pay, I think it was $15 or $17 an hour, for people to drop our literature at doors. And I really geared those messages to go out to the stay-at-home moms and the single moms. And they came in droves, and so they can make their own pocket money, because not everyone in my community are people who work outside of the home. So I learned that people can't be silenced. As long as we offered people a space to gather, vent, ask their questions, we were kind of providing a public service. People became the campaign, and it took a life on its own and ran without me. Slide 16. Election day, it was raining again, and we won. So it rained, there was a rainbow, my whole family helped me out. Thanks, Mom and Dad. They were there at the polls. There's Chrissy Houlihan, Congresswoman Chrissy Houlihan. So it's a very, very exciting day. Next slide, please. A little more of all the people that were the volunteers that came out. We got them some snazzy sweatshirts because it was freezing. And next slide, please. So, and with one election cycle, women's representation grew by leaps and bounds. The Fab Four, we ended up electing 4 congresswomen from PA. I like to call them Mary Gay, Madeline, Chrissy, and Susan. Next slide, please. 4 more women state senators, all 4 I could call friend. 53 state legislators, up from 38. Chester County's first female DA, Chester County's first African-American sheriff, and the list of firsts went on. Next slide. Without women at the table in politics, certain issues and views are not expressed or moved forward. We are in many ways still living that reality with the attack on Roe versus Wade. There's many injustices, the lack of mental health initiatives, the lack of common sense gun violence reform, justice reform that would really aid women, because women tend to be in jail longer than men. The lack of firm laws protecting women from sexual harassment, lack of childcare initiatives, the lack of higher minimum wage. It goes on and on. So we as women must champion ourselves. We can no longer wait for others to champion the causes that are important to us. Next slide, please. Imagine if we never took our eyes off the importance of public service, never took our eyes off of the potential for change to preserve human rights and make for a decent, more caring world. What if we put this energy into each and every election? Where would we be today? We are moving in the right direction. Progress was born out of women like you and me taking a seat at the table and making waves and making change. Next slide. As a legislator, I became the first freshman ever to serve as a deputy whip. And I kind of want to tell you that story. And the reason I'm laughing is I was so exhausted after running for 2 years. We ended up going to a wedding, and my husband said to me, as long as we drive to Boston together and it's just you and me time, like that's all I want. You know, I really haven't had your time. Well, I got a call that there was an election for deputy whip, and I was determined to become the first freshman, let alone female, in a leadership position in the PA House on both sides of the aisle. I inspired the Republican side to also demand the same thing, which they didn't end up appointing a freshman deputy whip. So I ended up doing this drive speaking to my colleagues about why I would make a good leader. And I had to even go up against another colleague who wanted to run against me, and it happened to be a female. And I had to go up against other colleagues saying, oh, Melissa, why another woman in a position of power? Enough already. Well, the story ends well. I was a little bit strategic, and by the end, I had people who were in power leadership positions calling the leaders saying, you really need to appoint Melissa to this. So they pulled the election. It was an internal election, and appointed me deputy whip. But I never would have had that opportunity unless I did do those 6 hours of phone calls and really stood up for myself and explained to people why I'm a good leader for our Democratic caucus. Next slide, please. So when women are at the table, we approach things differently. We work together to get a consensus. And I use my job as whip to do that, to promote other people's successes and learn about their initiatives. Next slide, please. You might want to know, okay, what do we influence? Okay, here it is. What do we actually do? State legislation affects every day of your life, from air quality to all-day kindergarten and other issues that might slide under the radar. And here's a not so fun fact. Did you know child marriage was just finally made illegal in Pennsylvania? Child marriage. No one was there to fight, to say we're not going to, marry off our 13-year-old daughters and sons. So it's critical for policymakers and public servants to represent the communities they serve and advocate for common sense issues that actually matter to people. People from different walks of life need to be part of the policy conversation. For women, this can be particularly challenging. It's no secret that government and politics are male-dominated arenas. The numbers speak for themselves. This is something that desperately needs to change, and we can all play a part in moving that needle and challenging norms. Next slide. This slide actually is a video. Oh, could you go back and just play the first maybe 20 seconds? Does it have an audio? Can you turn up the audio, or is it just me that can't hear it? Okay, we didn't test it beforehand, but this is my dear friend, Senator Muth now. And we can move on to the next slide. It shows the tone and the complete how emotional politics is in the amount of screaming and over exaggerating that happens when you're on the floor. I was just on the floor today speaking about something, and luckily was not yelled at like that, but my mic has been turned off a couple of times. Next slide, please. So we have seen surges of change like in 2018, but the movement needs to be ongoing, and that's a big ask. We're battling a pandemic, shocking unemployment rates, global humanitarian crisis, and it could feel like there's very little room for our voices as women in the midst of these issues. But we're still here, and the demand for representation matters, perhaps even more now than before. The truth is, women are leaving the workplace in droves. Next slide, please. And women are leaving the workplace in droves, and not because they want to. There were 2.2 million fewer women in the labor force in October 2020 than October 2019. 2.2 million fewer. And they're not voluntarily stepping out. They're being shoved out by job loss, shuttered schools, lack of childcare, lacking equal pay. So we need women to get in there and fight for equity. Next slide, please. Every woman and man listening tonight has climbed their own mountains. Maybe you've raised a family, dedicated yourself to, nonprofits or to academics. Maybe you did all of this while excelling at your career. Maybe you didn't begin a traditional career at all. Perhaps instead you ran your household, served as a caretaker to a loved one, volunteered your time to one of the many great causes, or maybe just traveled the world. Despite it all, I'm asking all of you, all of us, to do more. That includes me. Yes, more. Each and every one of us. That sounds unfair, right? I know it does. It's not because we're not enough. We are enough. But if you have it within you to pass it on, to be the voice that lifts a woman up to challenge this system, or even be that woman yourself, I promise that it is worthwhile. The world has changed dramatically, and perhaps that makes it even better time to dig in deep, confront discomfort and preconceived notions, shake them off, and consider how we want the world to look when we emerge from the hardships of this past year. Women are right in the fight. I say it every day, getting messy and taking no excuses. Change can only happen when you have a seat at the table. I have mine, and it has changed me forever. Regardless of how long my political career will last, it is now my mission and my passion to help women get into public office. So I'm holding an empty seat next to me. How can I help you get there? Thank you so much for listening, and I can take any questions.
Thank you so much, Melissa. Thank you. Probably the best way to ask questions, and I'm sure you have some, would be through the chat, which is on the bottom of your screen. That was certainly inspiring, and hopefully some of you might be inspired to run yourself. That was quite a motivation.
Well, I did hear that it takes women 9 times to be asked before they'll run for office. Now, of course, you have kind of a whining 16-year-old, like I was asked once. So anytime I have a meeting with women in my office, regardless of age, I had a 98-year-old. I also had a 8-year-old. I always ask, will you run for office or support a woman running for office? And support, I'm specific, campaign manager, helping with social media, knocking doors. So I'm asking all of you, will you run for office someday or support a woman running for office someday? I want to see a lot of yes. Heck yes, Melissa.
We have a question from Margie Cherry, and it is, how did you have the chutzpah to run not at the local or municipal level, but at the state level for the first time out?
Well, I think that's a great question. Well, because I'm qualified, just like all of you are qualified. I've worked in different jobs and I've worked at home. I've helped caretake and I've helped move the needle in business. That is enough. All women are enough, just as they are. And I must say, watch out. You don't know what I'm going to be doing next, but I'll tell you, it'll be a first.
Thank you. We have another question from Leslie McGeorge. Great talk. In the middle of so many important fights for equity, how do you recommend keeping gender equity and issues of import to women at the forefront?
Well, if you follow, this is a great question. If you follow Representative Melissa Shusterman on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, I think next Thursday, I'm doing an equal pay press conference. And it is hard. I mean, timing with the pandemic is everything. But as we know, what happened when we stopped talking about this? So many women left the workforce. And I'm talking women at every level. So we have VPs that left. They're like, you know, the pandemic, I've got to take care of my parents. You know, we have entry-level women that had to leave because there was no childcare. So at every level, it's critical that women get equity. And I was on the floor today and I was talking to a colleague of mine, and we have several initiatives. One initiative is going to be all about equity. And guess what? It might never pass, but this gives us the opportunity to continue speaking about it until it does pass. And then we obviously have an initiative around health, and health is holistic. If you don't have anyone watching your kids, how can you be healthy enough to get to work and to get to home? Where does that leave your mental health, your self-esteem? So I always like to talk about health and women's equity with very holistically. And I love that I've been appointed to 2 boards because it allows me to talk about the women perspective on these boards. And one of my boards is around transportation. And I really believe transportation equals equity. If you can't get there, you can't effectively run your life. And it really falls down to women. Women have the lowest paying jobs. They have the lowest access to transportation. The list goes on. So don't worry, I'm a loudmouth about this particular issue, and I will continue to advocate for women.
Wow. Thank you. I mean, Miles Wolf asks, first of all, he points out, and this is so true, you're an incredibly charismatic speaker. Would you be able to talk a little bit about how you developed your ability to speak on the big stage? Did you take public speaking courses or did
No, but I should, if I just had time. I mean, I'm on judiciary, just reading those bills and amendments. It's like, I can't even tell you, but I hire smart. The people I hired had never worked in politics before. And Sarah, who's on the call, had worked with me when I was a video director running my own digital firm. And when I say running my own digital firm, it was called Fedora Media for a purpose. So I could get hired without anyone knowing the person running it was a woman, because women don't get hired in the entertainment industry at the same rates as male firms do. So Sarah keeps me in line. She kept editing this and updating it. And have a good team around you. I think I need to learn how to speak more, but to do it better, I guess, be better at it. But the more you do it, and I sweat a lot at the beginning. I was so nervous. And I'm like perimenopausal, and now I'm menopausal. So like it would just pour off my face when I would be at like a presser or anything. I mean, if you saw the pictures from my first 2 years, I broke my ankle. I mean, I was just a sweaty, passionate mess. So what does that mean? I could have sat home and been really hard on myself and said, you didn't quite nail it. Or I could just say, gosh darn it, I'm just going to be a little louder and a little more refined and a little less sweaty next time.
Someone said a sweaty speaker means that you're killing it. That's so true. Ellen Weiler asks, did you feel that the incumbent in your 2018 election, was he resting on his laurels? Did you catch him by surprise, do you think?
No, it's Warren Camp. He's actually, I knew him, and he worked at my father's law firm. So that was awkward, but he was a very good door knocker. He would knock about 10,000 doors, very well liked, very less spastic than me, so very monotone and soothing. His voting record wasn't exactly how he portrayed himself, and so I had to really work hard to say, although he's really nice, you can stay friends with him, my voting record would look different, and I'm going to fight for different things. And I am a fighter. I think anyone who meets me knows I fight hard.
Mm. Which kind of leads to the next question. You know, women are tough, but do you find that women are more apt to be collaborative or cooperative in the legislative process? Are there personality traits maybe that women have that they can bring to the table, maybe that some men might not?
Oh, heck yes. I mean, there's studies out there, and I don't have it in front of me, but if there's more than one woman on a board, the entire tone of the board changes. And that video, I recommend you look it up, or we can find a way to email it to you. Men are always calling women emotional, and I've never in my life worked with such emotional people. They're not, well, they are outraged at all times, and they're not willing to just negotiate very common sense measures. And they're doing that probably to protect themselves, that they're acting in this role, which I want no part of. I just want to call a spade a spade. I laid out a great argument. You're going to vote against it because, you know, you're following everyone else. So I think women do well, and we work together. And the group Protect and Elect, which is one of 20 groups that came out of 2016. I would Sister District, Flippable, Turn PA Blue, Jamie runs that. Some of them came out of my basement. And these are people that are changing politics across the United States. So if you look at all those groups, they're run by women.
Thank you. That's interesting. We have a question from Sally Lou Loveman, who we know has spent a lot of time behind the TV camera and was very, she has a very distinguished career with Oprah Winfrey. And she's asking, how do you use your experience as a TV director in your role in politics?
That's a great question. I had to give up that beloved career now because I want to be 100% a public servant and make sure more women are running for office. So I spent a lot of my time, I think I'm still a director at heart. When I first launched, we did a lot of activities that were different for politicians, like cleaning up a national park, having walk and talks with your legislator, doing roundtables around gun reform that included both sides. Really kind of having an eye to how to package information. But I've left that chapter behind. So Sally, you give me a call when you're running for office and I'll walk you through it. I have a lot of documents I can share with you. I think I helped 17 candidates in the last cycle. So I'm ready for you, Sally. You just say when, okay? I'm serious. I asked you twice now.
Thank you. Melissa asks, how do you continue to prioritize, align, and reshape your personal interests, constituent interests, and party interests when developing your platform to run and move issues forward?
That's a great question, Melissa. I'm in my third year, though I ran for office for 2 years, so I feel like I've been in this world for 5 years. You do because people influence you. You listen. I know I've been blabbering a lot tonight, but a lot of my job is listening to what's important. Pre-pandemic, we never knew that I would be on the phone with the governor's office today talking about a mobile unit for my Black and brown communities of homebound seniors. You know, the more you listen and you learn, and you have to tell some people like, oh, come on, step off, like there's other people that, but not during a pandemic or the vaccine, but some issues you do see that maybe can be moved locally a lot faster, and other issues can be moved statewide faster. So you have to kind of put everything in buckets. And it's the best part is learning more and more about different issues that are passionate to me. I happen to support a lot of issues, and if there's a great champion there, I let them, they have the spotlight, and I'm there to support them in their legislation.
Thank you. That's interesting. Lisa Castle actually points out that there's an opportunity to run for the Senate from Pennsylvania. Any plans to throw your hat in the ring?
Probably not at this time, though I'm deeply disappointed that we don't have a woman running yet. So I think that's part of my deep love, is making sure every federal, state, local position, governor's position, we find women to run. So at this time, that's not what's happening.
You can make the announcement right here. We'll, you know, maybe you want to think about it. How do you work across the aisle and stay true to your ideals? Asks Margie Cherry.
Well, I'll tell you, it's through my vote. My vote are my ideals. And a lot of these votes are really tough. People don't explain to you that you're voting on a piece of legislation that sounds good, but there's a poison pill that takes other people's rights away. So what I choose to be very transparent to my community that I serve, and I'm willing to pick up the phone and debate anything at any time. I called a man on Sunday at like 7, and he's like, is it really you on the phone? I was like, yeah, we need to talk about this, because I'm going to explain, like, let's get this to a better place. Now, you can't do that as you go up the path. I have 70,000 people. If you run for Senate, it's all Pennsylvania. If you run for Congress, it's a lot more. But I think it's critical to be as transparent as possible. But let's be realistic, women. Social media is awful. It's a terrible thing, and I'm a human, but I have to not look at the train wreck. I have to just answer the people who have a legitimate question. And Sarah, who's on the call, helps me with that. But we all have a weak moment on a Saturday, eating a bagel going, oh my gosh, this person is awful. So I just try to stay above board and speak to people individually.
I'm sure you have to have some thick skin, right? I mean,
yes.
Yeah. Ellen asks, do men who have lost an election tend to run again at a greater rate? If
yes.
So, how do we inspire women to be resilient in the face of defeat?
Well, that's great. We had great women running on the state level this year, and the congressional level throughout the United States. And I want to confess that I am a optimistic cynic, or a cynical optimist. I really don't like acting like you win until it's in your hands. And winning just means like you've opened the door to working. That's all. After working, you're going to work some more. So luckily, I think a lot of the women, I did get on the phone and got quite a few of them to say they're going to run again. And that really comes down to very intimate conversations with some of these women have young children, others are retired, and they could really just enjoy their life. And you get on the phone and you listen and you talk and you say, I'll be there and I'll be supporting you and I'll bring supporters to you. So that helps. Then they kind of get geared up again.
That's great. Leslie McGeorge asks, if women are interested in supporting voters' rights, what do you recommend the best actions to take are in Pennsylvania and beyond?
Well, Leslie, you're getting into, there's a big push. What happened in the last 2 years wasn't just like a pandemic and the vaccine rollout. There's been a real divide between facts and reality and non-facts and non-science. So I look at voters' rights that way. We now vote by mail because that was a Republican initiative that later, unfortunately, the Harrisburg Republicans, not Republicans in my district, decided to try to dismantle. Well, I work with the people who work with voters and count ballots, and the guy happens to be a Republican actually, and he's like, we did it so well. So we have to continue doing voting by mail well. And the reason is our lifestyles are different. If I'm working, I was a single mom, I would work, pick up my son. Oh my gosh, if he had a wet diaper or something, I would go home. I'm not going to go wait in line at 9 o'clock at night, from 6 to 9 o'clock at night to go vote. And I'm very concerned about my intellectual and physical disability community and my seniors. It always rains on election day. Can we cut everyone a break so they can actually do vote at home? So I think Fair Districts is a great organization to join. They deal with looking at the districts, but they also got very, very involved in voting rights. They're very intelligent about it. They'll explain things. They'll come to organizations. Fair Districts, let them know, Representative Shusterman said. And also, everyone remember Protect and Elect. It's a great group of women. Sister District is good, and Flippable is good, and Turn PA Blue in Pennsylvania is an incredible organization. I did a talk about women's equity there. So these are great ways to get involved. And then what happens is you listen, and then they send you something and say, here's what you can do. You can write 200 postcards for Melissa because we're a little worried about her race, or she wants to get the word out on this or that, or this new candidate. So it's all laid out there for you. And for people who, I'll just type in my campaign side of my email. You can ask me a question or anything right there. It's very long, Melissa at melissashusterman.com. That's my campaign side. I don't want to overwhelm my official side with a bunch of questions about elections.
Thank you so much, Melissa, for what an insightful, educational, entertaining, motivational presentation tonight. We really, really appreciate you joining us. And please join us, all of you, for more insightful conference sessions like this one. You can view and register for them on our CLW conference page. I'll put that in the chat. And we're going to be sending out an evaluation within the next 24 hours, and we appreciate you taking a few minutes to share your feedback on tonight's session. We really, really appreciate your joining us. And I'm going to type in, I'm going to put this I don't know if I can do that, but yeah, it'll work. Okay. It is, I can tell you what it is. It is leopardlink.lafayette.edu. That is the link to the rest of the conference sessions. And I think you'll be inspired by many of them. So thank you so much, Melissa. What a wonderful presentation. Thank you all. Have a great rest of the evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.